6 o'clock. Welcome everybody to the Ag in the Evening series as it has continued for 2022. My name is Vanessa Coyer Olson. I'm the Forage Extension Specialist with Texas A&M AGRILIFE Extension, and I am your speaker for this evening. This program is hosted by multiple counties, by Houston County, Tyler County, as well as Gregg County. And we appreciate the support of those county agents. This was their idea during COVID, and we're glad that we can continue to provide this as a resource for you guys. So just a few things before we get started. If you don't mind keeping your microphones muted during the presentation, so that way nobody's distracted, myself as well as other participants. If you have any questions, you're welcome to use the chat. I'll try to monitor those to the best of my ability, but I may not catch them on the fly. You're also will be welcome to unmute at the end of the presentation to ask any questions if you feel like you need to give more detail with your question. So we do post these on our YouTube page. We include that information, that link, with any email reminders about upcoming programs or upcoming Ag in the Evening events. You can always watch previous or kind of archived presentations. So tonight's presentation is weed control options for drought management. So that is going to be our focus this evening. The next Ag in the Evening that Dr. Jason Banta will be presenting, I will have that date and information at the end of the program tonight, is also around the topic of drought and being prepared and how to plan or how to respond to drought conditions as far as forage production and beef cattle production. And so we're going to go ahead and get started tonight. So just in case anyone is not aware or not familiar with the U.S. Drought Monitor, it is an excellent resource as far as knowing what the conditions are in our state and even more so in your county. This is the current drought monitor for the most recent. I collected this pictograph this morning. So this is what's the most current conditions that are posted on the U.S. Drought Monitor, showing current conditions. Now, most of us know what current conditions are in our area. However, I feel like this spring has been a little bit misleading because even for many of us, especially for those of us in East Texas, we've had some storms, we've had some showers, and unfortunately, a lot of those showers have been very minimal. We've had sprinklings here or there. Very few of these events have actually accumulated or led to a large accumulation of moisture. And so a good majority of the state, as you can see, is somewhere from abnormally dry all the way to exceptional drought. So for a lot of us in East Texas, where either our counties are yellow, abnormally dry, the tan is kind of a moderate drought, orange is severe drought as we get a little further west and along I-35, and then extreme drought in West Texas and even up into the Panhandle with some exceptional drought. And so those are current conditions. But when we look at the outlook, what is the seasonal outlook, which is a 90-day outlook, unfortunately, this does not get any closer to a county level. It just shows you the map of the U.S. You can see for the entire state of Texas that is brown. Majority of the state is drought persist, and any yellow areas kind of in that southeast Texas and other parts, it says drought development likely. So this is what they're predicting for through the end of June. Now, typically, we really rely on a lot of moisture in the spring. We've had a very dry winter for majority of the state of Texas. And so we're just not really in good moisture conditions as we really kick off our warm season of forage production. So that is concerning, or should be concerning for us as far as forage production and how we are going to manage our forage production systems going into dry and having been in dry conditions for a period of time. And as of course you can see, a good part of the U.S., especially in the kind of the Midwest and all the way over to California, are are anticipated to have persistent drought as well. And so that can also influence our agricultural production systems. And so that can be very concerning. And as you can see, even part of South Louisiana is anticipated to be and have persistent drought. So in regards to weed control and drought, so a lot of us are likely have already begun thinking, or I've already received a lot of questions about weed control and trying to get ahead of weed issues or respond to cool season annual weeds that we see currently in our pastures and hay meadows. And so I want to talk tonight about how drought influences our weed control and maybe some recommendations on how we can manage our weed control during drought conditions. And so you've most likely seen this information before as far as just some recommendations or methods of weed control. So the first being cultural, promoting our desired forages. That will have a huge impact on our weed populations. And this season, given high fertilizer prices as well as lack of moisture, that will greatly influence our weed populations, as many of us make choices to not fertilize or to decrease our fertilization practices or to change our practices because of cost. That can decrease the persistence or reduce the forage production within our systems this season. And of course, the lack of rainfall will decrease that forage production as well. And so anytime our forages are stressed, whether it's from drought and or lack of soil fertility or an inappropriate soil pH for that forage production, for that forage system, we can anticipate that we're likely to see some undesired species. So a weed by definition is a plant out of place. And in my experience, following a drought, I get more questions about weed species that people claim were never on their property before, and all of a sudden they show up. Well, keep in mind that our weeds are oftentimes more tolerant. A lot of our weed species may be more drought tolerant than our forage species, or they're also often more tolerant of low soil nutrients or lack of soil nutrients. They will persist with fewer inputs many times than our desired forages. So as you start thinking about and making decisions moving into this warm season, keep in mind your decisions in regards to soil fertility can influence weed populations. And then also our grazing management. And this will be very important and something that I'm sure Dr. Bantha will cover in the second and then presentation following this one in April. He will talk about grazing management and how we need to respond as a result of drought or before a drought. And if we're overgrazing our forages, if we do not adjust our stocking rates or the grazing pressure within our forage systems, and we are overgrazing those forages, we are reducing their ability to compete against weed species, especially if we graze them too short. We've really opened up that canopy. We've exposed some bare soil. So we've created an opportunity for wheat or seeds to have access to light, sunlight, any moisture that we might receive during that time period. And those seeds can quickly germinate, being as there's no ground cover, there's no competition, and then we can see an increase in weed populations. And I'm sure many of us, as we're driving through or driving around Texas, have seen pastures that are overgrazed, and we see a lot of undesired vegetation, whether it's other grassy weeds or it's broadleaf plants that are undesirable. And so keep in mind how we proceed this summer will influence our weed populations this season, as well as maybe what we might see following drought. So we can see an increase in weed populations following drought if we do not manage our forages appropriately well before and during drought conditions. So some other options or other methods of weed control: biological or grazing. During a drought season, we may be more tolerant of some of our grassy weeds, that if those grasses have nutritive value, such as if we have some Bahia grass in a Bermuda grass pasture. Even though Bahia grass is not necessarily very drought tolerant, we may allow or be accepting of that grass in our forage system for the time being, because it does provide nutrition for our livestock. Other species that we might consider not actively controlling with a herbicide as far as other grassy weeds, maybe crabgrass or Johnson grass or even Dallas grass. There are a lot of grassy weeds I get questions about that could possibly have nutritive value for our livestock, and they could, provide some grazing during potentially a drought season. Now, crabgrass, we're not likely to see a lot of crabgrass when we don't have a lot of moisture. It is a grassy weed we saw quite a bit of last year because we had a lot of spring and even some early summer moisture. So we may not see as much crabgrass this year because of drier conditions. But there may be some plants that we're willing to tolerate because they can provide some nutrition for our livestock and spend less time trying to really eradicate them, especially this season. Maybe it's something we tackle down the road once drought or during a season when drought is not as concerning. Mowing, we'll talk about mowing as an option. And then, of course, we'll focus on the use of herbicides this evening and how drought impacts the effectiveness of those herbicides and how we can respond to be effective with our weed control. So when I talked about cultural practices such as soil fertility and overgrazing, or lack of soil fertility and overgrazing, this is a plant, in my opinion, that is an indicator of poor management, and that is broom sedge bluestem. I have seen a lot of broom sedge bluestem in Central and East Texas over the past couple of years. As we shift our management, we overgraze our pastures or we are not fertilizing actively, we are going to see a shift in our forage systems, and we start to see some of these plants, such as broom sedge bluestem. Broom sedge bluestem by itself is not competitive. So when our desired forages, Bermuda grass or even Bahia grass, do not have a competitive edge because they have either been overgrazed or they have not had the nutrients and soil pH needed for their production and persistence, we can start to see species like broom sedge bluestem take over or become more apparent, a greater percentage of our pasture system. I have seen a pasture personally go from a beautiful coastal Bermuda grass stand with some clover naturally reseeding and thriving in that field. And then over time with reduced management, it slowly shifted to primarily Bahia grass. And the clover was eventually lost. And now a majority of that pasture is broom sedge bluestem. And broom sedge bluestem has no nutritive value to livestock or wildlife. Your cattle may graze it at the very beginning of the season, right as it starts to green up, and it will green up about the same time as Bermuda grass and Bahia grass. But as that matures, they're not going to graze it very long. It's going to decrease in value, and especially compared to other plant species that are in that area. So I've received several questions on controlling broom sedge bluestem, and this is something to keep in mind that your management will influence the presence of this particular species. As far as control, the only herbicide that's going to have activity on broom sedge bluestem is glyphosate or Roundup. So we don't have a lot of option. And I know a lot of people are afraid to use Roundup or glyphosate on Bermuda grass, but it's our only option when it comes to controlling broom sedge bluestem. And so just keep that in mind. And there are rates of glyphosate that we can safely use in our Bermuda grass pastures and hay meadows and not lose those stands. So mowing as a method during drought, a lot of people will defer to mowing even during good growing conditions, primarily because of instant gratification, as well as we enjoy spending time on driving the tractor, and we think it's cheaper. And in some cases, it may be cheaper, but it's not necessarily very effective. And the most important thing to keep in mind, and mowing can be a method, but one thing to keep in mind when using mowing for weed control, especially in a drought, is that when you're mowing those weeds, you're also mowing that grass. You're mowing that valuable forage, whether it's in a pasture or hay meadow. And during a drought, one of the most important things to us is keeping our forages, is having that forage available for grazing, or trying to actually harvest a hay cutting before things get too dire. So keep that in mind. As far as effectiveness, if you're trying to control something like goat weed, a a warm season annual that's very easy to control with herbicides. If you're trying to control it, our goal was to kill it before it becomes reproductive. So before it produces a flower or any type of seed. So mowing it when it's in the vegetative stage, when it's small and growing, is really the best time and the only time you can potentially impact that population, keep it from becoming reproductive. Now, unfortunately, goat weed, if we have been dry, we receive any moisture, it is often one of the first things that pops up. And so you're likely would need to mow several times during the season, or more than once for sure, even if we are in dry conditions. If you're trying to control a perennial, so blackberries or dewberries or any woody species, as many of you know, if you cut that plant, it's going to resprout from that root structure. And so it's not a once and done kind of fix or solution whenever it comes to weed control. So just keep that in mind as you start thinking about mowing as a means of weed control during a drought, that you are mowing that valuable forage. Now, if you can set your mower higher and kind of top some weeds to reduce some of that competitiveness, that is something that is often recommended during an establishment year. So anybody that's planting new seeds or new sprigs, mowing may be the best or only option, because we have fewer herbicides that are very effective or that are labeled for new plantings of Bermuda grass or Bahia grass or any of our other forages. So since we have fewer herbicide options, mowing may become a tool or our only tool during that establishment season. So when we look at the economics, this is a little bit older, but mowing is not necessarily always cheaper. Now, there are herbicides that are much more expensive, but it really is going to come down to the target weed and what's the best recommendation, and then how important control of that target weed is to you. So not only do you have to look at the economics, but you also have to look at effectiveness, and then also what's important to you. Is it critical to really get rid of those sandburs in your hay meadow, because it decreases the value of your product as you're trying to market it to other livestock producers in Texas? So you have to weigh all of those factors to really determine whether herbicide is economical or not. So it's a lot more than may not necessarily just be cost per acre. So as we talk about use of herbicides, of course, the label is the law. I will talk about several recommendations whenever it comes to the use of herbicides during a drought. And a lot of that, and I will repeat this most likely, several points are things that you will need to clarify or make sure you are following label directions. When it comes to things like using adjuvants, such as surfactants, or temperature, that product is effective. As far as our temperatures during the summer, is that product going to be effective if it's over 80 degrees Fahrenheit outside when you're making that application? Also, what is the rate? What is the best rate, or what is the rate that is recommended for that target weed given within that system? So please pay attention you should always read the label anytime, especially, of course, always, but definitely during drought for sure, as far as paying attention to any of their recommendations as far as weather conditions that can reduce the effectiveness of that product or change the effectiveness of that product. So very important. Grazing restrictions. I think during a drought year, we most likely want to avoid products that have a grazing restriction. We may want to be able to graze or have access to our pastures during the whole season, or not be limited to access of our property based on some of those restrictions. And in my opinion, weed identification is always important. During a drought, it will be important as well, because we want to be effective with our herbicide applications, because we're not only fighting that weed, but we're also fighting some weather conditions that can influence the effectiveness of herbicides. And so we want to make sure we are using the best recommended product for that target weed if we really want to have an impact, especially during drought conditions. So we tend to, it says do not apply during drought. So you will see that quite often, that it is often recommended not to use herbicides during drought conditions. And I wouldn't say that's a definitive recommendation. You have to evaluate your forage production system and what is important and what is critical for you during that season. And it may, we can have weed populations and weed pressures that really decrease our grazable area, and that they need to be eliminated or reduced even during a drought season, so we can increase our grazable area. Also, we need to keep in mind that weeds are going to compete for with our desirable forages for moisture, as well as any expensive nutrients that we are applying. So that will be important to keep in mind. Now, there may be some weeds that we tolerate even during good conditions because they're very minimal or there's not that many of them. But things can get out of control very, very quickly. So just a lot of things to think about. So there was a question, I'll go ahead and address it. What is the best recommended resource to identify weeds? So Warren, there's a lot of different resources available to you. Some of maybe your faster resources would include your county extension agent. You can often take them a plant in a pot. You can dig up a weed and deliver it to them directly to their office. Most of us have cell phones, and so we can snap pictures. If your smartphone has a let's see, I think somebody is unmuted and I can't quite figure out who that is. So you can. Most of us have smartphones or cell phones that have cameras. You can snap a picture. You can send it to your county extension agent. You can email it to me directly. I'm happy to help with identification. If you are using that means, take multiple pictures, use something to illustrate scale, whether it's your hat, your ball cap, a pen out of your pocket, a shovel, something to indicate size of that plant to whomever you're asking to identify. I'm happy to supply a list of websites as well as books. There are also some apps. Some of them are maybe more consistent than others, but your county extension agents and myself were great resources. We can help with identification. So that was a good question. As far as locating labels, I recommend well before you purchase or use a product, once again, reading the label. I realize they're very arduous, but they have a lot of very important information. You can locate labels at two websites, cdms.net as well as greenbook.net. They're both labeled databases. Now, they are not strictly limited to pasture and hay production, so do keep that in mind. You can search by product names such as Grazon Next HL or active ingredients such as Picloram. To find different products. But please make sure that the products you purchase and you use are labeled for pasture and hay production if that is in your intended application site. Other sources can be the manufacturer website. They will most likely have the most current labels. So that can be important to check to make sure you have a current label. Those labels may get updated because of a shift in percentage of active ingredient. So make sure the product label that you are reading matches the product that you purchase and it's the most up-to-date information. So you have the correct information and you're following the correct label directions. So chemical control strategies, most of us will most likely be making broadcast applications. Individual plant treatments typically reserved for our brush species, our perennial woody species, so that we can get a higher concentration of an active ingredient directly onto that plant and increase the effective control or the effectiveness of that product on control. So more importantly, I want to talk about, of course, drought and weed control and some recommendations. First and foremost, something we should always keep in mind is the use of herbicides with high temperatures. So we do live in Texas, of course, most of us, I'm assuming all of us, or most of us, or we live in the Southeast where we do get fairly warm. And most of our herbicides are going to be more effective at temperatures that range from the 70s up to the mid to high 80s degrees Fahrenheit. So once we get past 90 degrees Fahrenheit, a lot of our herbicides are just not going to be very effective. And that is because of the way our plants respond to heat as well as drought conditions. So plants in general, whether they are weeds or desirable Bermuda grass or desirable plants, they're all going to respond to heat and drought very similarly. So they're going to go into what I consider water conservation mode. So they are going to, all of our plants have stomatas on their leaves, and that stomata allows for the release or the, absorption of CO2. It can also, when those stomatas are open, result in the release of oxygen, and it also results in the release of water. Those stomatas, if they are open, will also take in herbicide. So whenever we have high temperatures above in the 90s or higher, we have drought conditions, those stomatas are more frequently closed to conserve water, to reduce the amount of water that is lost. And so when those stomatas are closed, it is more challenging to get herbicide taken into that plant. And then also when plants are under drought conditions, they do not translocate herbicides as quickly. So if you spray a herbicide during a drought condition, you may see a slower response. So that will be important as you use herbicides. If you make herbicide applications during a drought, you will most likely see a slower response. So it's not going to be an instant kill, or you're not going to see a quick impact to that plant very quickly. So it may take longer depending on that product. Some of our products work faster. In my experience, aminopyralid typically has a faster burn down than picloram, but that would be during good growing conditions. So maybe a slower response during drought or high temperature conditions. So some alternatives, some ways to kind of avoid those high temperatures during the summer, obviously, and as well to avoid those high temperatures for yourself, is to make herbicide applications in the morning, early in the morning when we're still fairly cool or cooler, or in the evening as our temperatures drop. So it may be very late or very early. Now, granted, I'm an early riser, and in the past, in the summers, I've gotten up at 4 a.m. in the morning and it's already 90 degrees. So you'll really have to watch those temperatures prior to making a herbicide application, and try to time it as best as you can to avoid some of that heat and take advantage of when those stomatas are open. So you'll get greater absorption of that herbicide into those leaf structures. And hopefully that plant will start translocating that herbicide during that time. But do keep in mind, you will likely see a slower response of those weeds to those herbicide applications. I think I maybe went too quickly. So as far as pre-emergent herbicides, right now, a very popular pre-emergent product for us in Texas, especially for the control of sandburrs, is Resilon. And it is possible, if you have already made a pre-emergent application for sandburrs this winter, you should be making a second application in the next couple of weeks. So mid to late May, early June, when we might be anticipating a first hay cutting or following a first hay cutting. That should be your second, kind of the time for your second application of Resilon to control sandburrs. So that is obviously going to be during dry conditions. Now, our pre-emergents do require moisture in order for them to be effective, because they interrupt that seed germination process, and moisture is needed for seed germination to happen. So keep that in mind. Based on research from Bayer, they have seen Resilon sit there for 90 plus days in dry soil and not have moisture. And once it did receive moisture, it was still effective. So just keep that in mind. If you have already made your first application for Resilon, I would still recommend your second application at 3 ounces per acre at the appropriate time to help with those sandburr populations. But just realize, don't let it deter you from making that application because we are dry. because that product luckily will sit there in the soil and kind of wait for moisture. And so hopefully, even though we're anticipated to be in a drought, hopefully we will receive some moisture here and there that can help with the kind of the incorporation of that herbicide, as well as promoting germination, so you can have some sandbur control. So that is typically, most of our pre-emergents are typically going to be made during the winter season, when we do tend to have more moisture. But Resilon does have some summer and fall recommendations for controlling different target species. So just keep that in mind, that moisture is important for those products to be effective. But Resilon, you have a kind of a bigger window of opportunity, so that just in case anybody was worried about that, I did want to share that information. So drought obviously will influence seed germination of not only desired species, but also our undesired species. So typically our smaller seeded weeds, I think I said that right. That's too many. Seed and weed are too close to the same word almost. So small seeded weeds, any small seeded plants typically do not have to be buried very deeply. They're pretty shallow in our soils. And so obviously in East Texas, we have very sandy soils. So depending on where you're located, our sandy soils dry out a lot faster. And so, and when our soils do dry out, those top 2 to 3 inches obviously dry out first. And so you may not see some of those smaller seeded weeds that may be in that shallow surface, may not necessarily germinate. You may not see as many of those germinate this year with drier conditions. So some examples of what some of those weeds might be that we're familiar with: mare's tail or horseweed, which I've actually already seen some germinate. So they will start to germinate this time of year. And I do think we are getting enough moisture here and there to promote that germination. Ragweed, shepherd's purse, some of our wild mustards, and probably tons of other weeds. Our larger seeded weeds, such as many of our grasses, such as Johnson grass, sandburs, even things like some of our larger seeded, they're typically going to be deeper in the soil profile. And so they'll actually have access to deeper soil moisture. So drought may not influence the germination of those weeds as it might some of our smaller seeded weeds. So you may see a difference in some of the weed populations this year based on the drought conditions and seeds that have access to moisture or not. So areas that hold more moisture, you're likely to see greater weed populations potentially in those areas, as opposed to your upland locations that dry out a lot faster. So as far as how do herbicides actually perform during drought conditions, of course, herbicides are going to be more effective when we have good growing conditions, because when our plants have good growing conditions, they have adequate moisture and appropriate temperatures, then they're translocating, they are moving nutrients and water throughout their plant structure. So therefore they will move a herbicide throughout their plant structure. Their stomates will be open more frequently, so they'll take in more herbicide and then move that herbicide down into the root structure and back to kill the top growth, as well as have an impact on those roots, which is what our goal is with herbicide application. So some things that we can do during a drought, and I think even during good growing conditions. One is to spray our weeds when they are small, especially our annual weeds, to be more persistent or more focused on quick identification and targeting those weeds at the appropriate time to be the most effective. So targeting our goat weeds when they're less than 3 inches. Any of our warm season annuals, catching them when they're very small will be a lot easier. It could take lower rates of herbicide, and they're also going to be much more susceptible to herbicide when they are younger, especially our warm season annual weeds, as opposed to when they are more mature. So typically when our goat weeds are taller, I heard Corteva rep use this, and I think it's a great illustration. So when your warm season annuals, they should not be bigger than a can of Coke. So like A soda can, whether it's Coke, Pepsi, whatever your Dr. Pepper, I should say that in Texas, should not be bigger than an aluminum can of Dr. Pepper. If it is as tall or taller than a 2-liter bottle, then it's going to require a higher rate, a much higher rate, or a more substantial, more expensive herbicide. So we're going to be more effective if we can catch those annual weeds when they are smaller than a Coke can or a Dr. Pepper can. So that will be very important during drought conditions. Also, something else that will be very important, you will often see on a herbicide label, and I meant to kind of create an example, and I apologize I didn't, but if we look at a herbicide label, you will often see a table for different weeds that a variety or a range of a herbicide rate application will control those various weed species. So when you look at that table and there is a range, I recommend for goat weeds or whatever your target weed is, within that label recommendation, within that label rate, that you apply the higher rate for that range that they recommend for controlling that species. So if it ranges from 1 to 1.5 pints to control, say, goat weeds for that particular product, then I would recommend going with 1.5 pints. Whereas during good growing conditions, we could probably easily achieve control with 1 pint per acre. With going with a little bit higher rate, we're hopefully going to increase the amount of herbicide in each droplet when we are spraying that herbicide. So we are increasing the concentration of that active ingredient in that droplet. And so when those droplets hit those leaves, then you will increase the amount of herbicide that is most likely to be absorbed within that leaf, within that plant structure. So that is one recommendation, or a second recommendation to help improve your effectiveness. So some other recommendations, like I said, apply full labeled rates. So labeled rates. So once again, going back to that label, what is your target weed? What are the rates they're recommending? They're typically going to give you a range. Go with that higher rate. Also consider adding an adjuvant to your tank. And we're going to talk about some specific recommendations in regards to what I would recommend as your choice of adjuvant. But as always, read the label. Labels will have specific recommendations on what adjuvants work well with their product and increase herbicide effectiveness per their particular product. And then once again, spray weeds when they're small. We'll reiterate that on every slide if we have to. So as far as adjuvants, adjuvant by definition is basically products that are used to enhance herbicide activity. So that could be various things such as increased absorption of that particular product into the leaf material, to be able to absorb through a waxy cuticle or fine hairs on that leaf structure. And that is something also to keep in mind when we do have drought. Once again, those plants are going to go into survival mode. And one thing that they will often do is they may create a thicker waxy cuticle covering or increase the percentage or the amount of fine hairs that they have in order to help conserve moisture within that leaf structure. So there's a lot of different adjuvants. There's an excellent publication by some of my colleagues on the Forage Facts website about adjuvants. It's very short, has some great information. It's under the publications tab on Forage Facts. You may find that useful. It even addresses why we should not use dishwashing detergent or laundry detergent as a quote unquote adjuvant when spraying pesticides, especially herbicides. So as far as what I would consider some of the better adjuvants to use during drought conditions, once again, referring to the label to get the best recommendation for a specific product, but non-ionic surfactants, or NIS, you may have seen that acronym before. So non-ionic surfactants are water-soluble chemicals and liquid compounds that are charged, molecularly charged. So they're either positive or negative. And those surfactants reduce the surface tension of the water molecule. So here's a good picture or an illustration on the left. Product without a surfactant, that water beads up and it ends up rolling off of the leaf, where it takes longer for it to be absorbed into that leaf structure. Whereas with a surfactant, such as a non-ionic surfactant, It reduces that surface tension and allows for that water droplet to spread to cover that surface area more completely, and that leads to greater absorption of that herbicide or that product into that leaf area, as opposed to losing it to runoff. So that can be important. Addition of a non-ionic surfactant can increase absorption of a herbicide during good growing conditions, but it can be even more critical during drought conditions when our absorption may be limited because of heat or drought conditions. Another option is a crop oil concentrate, or a COC. It is composed of emulsifiable petroleum-based oil, so it's 83 to 85% petroleum-based oil, and it has a small percentage of a non-ionic surfactant. It's also known as a penetrating agent, so that will help with absorption of that herbicide into that leaf structure. So there are some other products such as vegetable oil concentrates or methylated seed oils. Those will also, they also have a percentage of a non-ionic surfactant, and so they can help with absorption of herbicides into leaf structure as well. So a lot of these products are recommended, especially on brush or woody species, especially things like greenbrier that have a waxy cuticle covering. But even for some general broadleaf weed control, the addition of these products can help to increase absorption. Now, they may not necessarily be inexpensive. It is definitely important during drought, if we're making herbicide applications, to invest in some of these products and high quality products, not just buying the cheapest one. Because if you're taking the time to buy herbicide to make the application, you're going to add the correct adjuvant. You want to be effective with your application. So I recommend investing in a high quality product that will actually increase the absorption of that herbicide within that plant structure. So timing, I've already addressed this, but it's critical during good growing conditions. It will be important during drought conditions. And keep in mind that our plants are also going to respond to drought in the means of going reproductive very quickly. So for our perennial weeds that we're often trying to control, such as Carolina horse nettle, silverleaf nightshade, the timing for herbicide application, the recommended timing is at blooming, so that plant is going to move or translocate that herbicide down into the root structure. So we take out that root structure as well. Keep in mind, your Carolina horse nettle may not have bloomed last year until July. We were very cool, really until about June. But keep in mind, when we are hot, when we are dry, especially in drought conditions, those plants are going to become reproductive quicker than they would during a more typical year, because that's their whole goal is to be reproductive. So they will become reproductive much faster when there are drought, when there is stress. So keep in mind, your timing may be even earlier, even on those perennials, than maybe what it has been in the past. So make sure you are paying attention, scouting your fields. I'm sure many of us are going to be out there checking on our animals, making sure they have water, as well as checking on our forage production, maybe making fertilizer applications or what have you. So just start scouting earlier, pay attention to those weed populations, and make herbicide applications at the appropriate time to be effective. There was something else I've lost. It'll come back to me in a second. Another important, of course, anytime when we're making herbicide applications, sprayer calibration. This will be very important, even more so during drought conditions. It's always important. Everything I'm talking about tonight is important always, but I want to reiterate, even more critical during drought conditions. Sprayer calibration will be important to make sure your equipment is working appropriately so you have good coverage, because good coverage with a herbicide during drought conditions is going to be important, so that you have the amount of product on each of those weeds across that pasture, across that hay meadow. So you increase your chances of effective control. You're increasing the amount of herbicide on each of those individual target weeds so that you can have absorption and effective control with that product. So calibration is very important. very simple steps. There are directions on my Forage Facts website. There are calibration or sprayer calibration steps for a boom or a boomless spray rig. Very simple, does not take a lot of time. In my opinion, it is up there with soil testing, something that's very inexpensive and very easy to do that can help us be more efficient with our agricultural production systems and with our practices. And so that will be very important to make sure we have good coverage. That will also be very important for another reason, because even when our weeds are stressed during drought and high temperatures, so are our forages. So will our Bermuda grass and Bahia grass. Bermuda grass is more drought tolerant than Bahia grass, so Bahia grass will often go dormant earlier than Bermuda grass. But keep in mind, when our forages are stressed from drought or lack of nutrients or a combination thereof, they're going to be much more susceptible to our herbicides. So it will be very important that you are A, following label directions, B, that your equipment is calibrated, and that you are trying to time those applications when maybe it's the least stressful. So when our temperatures are cooler, such as in the morning or in the evening, to give those weeds an opportunity to take in that herbicide, and hopefully our forages are a little less stressed. So do keep that in mind. Even products that are labeled for Bermuda grass that do not cause any damage to our forages during good growing conditions. If we have stressed Bermuda grass from drought, lack of fertility, disease, or a combination thereof, they can often become more sensitive to some of these herbicides that are labeled for use in those pasture or hay meadow systems. So keep that in mind. Once again, follow those label directions and make sure your equipment is calibrated so you know exactly you are putting out the intended rate of a given product. Something else we need to keep in mind is we're using herbicides this year. With high fertilizer prices, a lot of people are interested in using legumes for the sole purpose of recycling nitrogen. So I'm already getting questions about incorporating legumes into our forage systems, how to use those to recycle or to provide nitrogen for our forage systems. So we need to keep in mind that there are products that we might be using this summer that can prevent seed germination of our legumes during the fall. So those products under non-legume program will need to be extra cautious this year. With drought conditions, drought decreases microbial breakdown of herbicides. So that can cause a longer residual from some of our active ingredients. Residual control is great for providing some season-long control. However, many of these products, such as aminopyrrolid, picloram, methylfuron methyl, because of their residual, if we are making multiple or higher rate applications during the summer, they can prevent legume seed germination in the fall. And so we can expect maybe some longer residual with drier conditions, because with drier soil environment, we'll have, less microbial activity, and microbes are one means of how is one way herbicides are broken down or degraded within our environment. So if there's less microbial activity, we might have a little bit longer residual with some of those herbicides during drought conditions. So something to keep in mind as you are looking to the future and what your plans are. So maybe think about, if you're interested in using legumes, cool season legumes, locate a part of your property where you have very little weed issues, or maybe your only issue is a warm season annual that you can control with an early application of 2,4-D or Weedmaster, and not have a long residual control and still be successful with legume seed germination in the fall. So just something to keep in mind. I am happy to share my slides if you want this information for later, or for your notes or for your office. Just send me an email and I'm happy to share a copy of my slides. So a few notes as we're wrapping up tonight. Our next Ag in the Evening events, the next one is April 26th. Dr. Banta will be covering drought considerations and planning for limited forage. So kind of the second part of our drought discussion. And then May 10th, the topic is fertilizer blends and purchase considerations with a cost spreadsheet. So that can be a very useful tool in making fertilizer decisions, economical decisions. If you do not have links to those programs, you should have received, if you've participated in Ag in the Evening programs before, you should have received an email today from Dr. Banta with the link for tonight's program or the link for upcoming programs, as well as the link for past programs on the YouTube that you can watch. If you need the links for the upcoming programs or for our YouTube channel where we post these recordings, please reach out to myself or Dr. Banta or Joe Smith, the county agent in Houston County, Shaniqua Davis, the county agent in Gregg County, or Jacob Spivey, the county agent in Tyler County. Any of them are able to connect you with that information as well. My website, foragefacts.tamu.edu. I do keep a link under the events. There is a link for the YouTube channel for the Ag in the Evening series. And I do also try to post upcoming events. If you don't find what you're looking for on there, just reach out to myself or Dr. Banta or one of the agents. There is a publications tab. You can find excellent information on weed control, including the Adjuvants publication I mentioned earlier. And you're always welcome to subscribe to Forage Facts for additional future information. I did very quickly, there it is. I had a question. If you don't mind using the chat feature to drop in your opinion. Like I said, you should have received an email, I think yesterday and maybe even possibly today, reminding you of the upcoming Ag in the Evening events, as well as including the link for the YouTube channel. We just wanted to see if this was helpful, if you liked this additional reminder, or if you already received way too many emails. So if you don't mind dropping in the chat that you appreciated the reminder or not, you get too many emails, kind of taking a poll as to what the preference might be. And at this time, I'm also happy to answer any questions. You're welcome to unmute, or you can use the chat if you prefer.
Dr. Courier-Olson, is it too late to spray for heart leaf nettle?
Oh, okay. That is not one that I am very familiar with. Heart leaf nettle. I'm looking it up so I can see what it looks like. Okay. Trying to see if it's a well. Now here we go. It's an annual. So if it's an annual species, ideally we want to control it when it is small and growing, when it's in the vegetative stage. So depending on the size of that plant, at this point in the year, if it's still fairly small, I would treat as soon as possible. If it's a little bit bigger, you could still try to treat it. Depending on where you are in the state, you may still be getting some moisture at this time, hit or miss with some of these rainfalls, and we still have some cooler temperatures, so you can take advantage of this time, even with a more effective product. I would think aminopyrrolid and Grazon Next HL or Duracor, if it is in a pasture or hay meadow, would be very effective at any stage. But you may have to increase your rate if it's a more mature plant.
Did your resource say whether it was a winter annual or a summer annual by chance?
Well, that was something I was trying to find. Let's see. Here's the.
It's bigger than a Dr. Pepper can.
Oh, okay. Is it bigger than a 2 liter?
No, ma'am.
No, not yet. Well, that's. I can find that it's an annual. I'm having a hard time finding whether. Oh, it must be a cool season because it says it dies back naturally in hot weather. So it must be a cool season.
Thank you.
You're welcome. We all learned something tonight, including me. All right. I saw a question, when to spray Bahia grass? Excellent question. So Bahia grass, we want to control it when it's our first application should be early in the season, once it has greened up and is actively growing. So probably most likely fairly soon, probably mid-May, potentially maybe early May at the earliest. Watch our weather conditions. When our nighttime temperatures are 60 degrees Fahrenheit consistently, then Bahia grass as well as Bermuda grass will start actively growing. So at this time, our nights are getting warmer, but we haven't quite reached 60 degrees consistently. We've been fluctuated a little bit right now. So at that point, I would make an application with metsulfuron methyl, whether that's in Cimarron Plus or Pastora or metsulfuron methyl by itself. There's a product called MSM60 that's metsulfuron methyl. And then keep in mind, you will most likely need a repeat application in about 4 to 6 weeks following that initial application. So that would be my recommendation on Bahia grass. Any other questions? Well, thank you guys for participating this evening. Hopefully it was very helpful. If you have any questions, once again, you're always welcome to reach out to me via email, or you can always call. If you have any questions around forage production, I'm always happy to help. And we look forward to having you participate in future Ag in the Evening. It appears that most people prefer the email reminder. I always need as many reminders as possible for myself. So I would personally appreciate it. So we just wanted to make sure we all get tons of emails every day. We don't want to overburden you with additional emails to delete. So with that, I appreciate your attendance. You're more than welcome to stay on and ask any additional questions you have. If not, thank you for joining us this evening.